First, I read Yuri Trifonov's The House on the Embankment, a book that made a very strong impression on me and so many other people. And then, some 20 years ago or so, I wrote an article called The Soviet Union as a Communal Apartment, where communal apartment was a metaphor for the kind of ethno-territorial federation that the Soviet Union was. And so then I decided that it would be interesting to write the history of an actual communal apartment, such as the one in which I grew up. Most of my friends and relatives lived. And so I just kept looking, traveling from one apartment to another, until I ended up in the largest building, residential building in Europe. So that's the story. I found some of the former residents. I interviewed about 65 people, most of them women. And then I worked in various archives. I did want this book to feel like a novel in some ways. And I tried to structure it as a novel. And I wanted certain motifs, themes, and metaphors to reappear throughout. So it has that quality to it, but it is definitely a work of history. But again, certain stories seem fictional, and then it's very important in the book, the fiction that was written by some of the people who lived in that building, and works of fiction that were written about some of the people who lived in that building. And all those are also part of the story. And then finally, Yuri Trifonov, whom I mentioned at the outset, the author of The House on the Embankment, is an important character, and he, in a way, presides over the project. Took me a while to decide how to begin the book, but I always knew how it was going to end, that it was going to end with an epilogue about Trifonov, about his work, about the way in which he, in effect, chronicled the Russian Revolution and the lives of his parents, his neighbors, his friends in that building, in effect, the fate. Well, that's what I think the Bolsheviks were. They were not a party. Lenin called it a party of a new type, by which he essentially meant that it was a sect, it was a faith-based community in conflict with the world, with voluntary membership, contingent on personal conversion, and a strong sense of chosenness and exclusiveness. So that's a sort of standard definition of a sect, and that's what I believe they were. And they weren't just any old sect, they were a millenarian apocalyptic sect, in that they expected the end of the world as we know it in their lifetimes, very latest during the lifetimes of their children. And that's in some ways the backbone of the story. And that's why I do not begin the book with the building of the house, but I begin it, and I'm sorry for the length, and that's the reason for the length. I begin it at the time when most of my characters, as young men and women, sometimes boys and girls, converted to this faith and joined that sect. And so I try to show why they did so, what that sect was like, and what that faith was all about. And they were not shy about using the word faith in their diaries and their letters, as well as their articles and speeches. It was all about faith, a very intense faith.